The air went very still, not peaceful. Still the way a room goes quiet right before something breaks. Then the sound began. Not thunder, not rain, something older. A sound for which the people about to hear it had no name. And then it hit. 3 civilizations, 3 prophets sent to warn them. 3 times the warning was refused. This is the story of what comes after the refusal. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. This video series is based on hundreds of references from reliable Islamic sources. All AI visuals were prepared in consultation with qualified Muslim scholars and are in line with Islamic guidelines. Let's take a step back. Long before the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, walked the earth. Long before the Quran was revealed in a cave above Mecca. In an era so ancient that the sands of Arabia have buried most of its memory. 3 civilizations rose to the peak of what human beings in their era could achieve, and into each of them, Allah sent a messenger. We sometimes assume that ancient people who rejected their prophets were simply primitive, or ignorant, or superstitious. But the nations in this story were none of those things. The people of Ad were the most powerful civilization of their time, physically, architecturally, militarily. The people of Thamud were master artisans, builders of unmatched skill. And the people of Sodom lived in a prosperous trading city at the crossroads of the ancient world. These were not accidents of geography. They were people who had been given exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it, and who chose deliberately to refuse. That makes their stories harder to dismiss and more important to understand. Now, let's begin with the mightiest of them all. Far to the south of Arabia, in the region known as the Aqaf, the great curving sand dunes, there lived a civilization that had no parallel in the ancient world. Their name was Ad. The Quran says something about them that should stop us in our tracks. That among all the civilizations that had ever existed, the like of them had never been created in the land. Their towers rose over the landscape of the Arabian Peninsula like nothing that had come before. Not temples for their gods, towers for themselves, high places they could point to and say, "Look at what we built, look at what we are." Their land was fertile, their armies were unmatched. Their physical strength was extraordinary, a strength the Quran references as something given to no civilization before or after them. They were, by every measure of their world, the top of the pyramid, and they knew it. Their leaders held formal councils, gatherings in grand rooms where the most powerful men in the most powerful nation on earth made decisions together. When the news spread that a man from among them was speaking words that challenged everything they had built their world upon, they did not ignore him. They summoned him. Because men like the chiefs of Ad did not ignore things, they faced them and crushed them. What they could not have imagined, standing in the highest room of the highest tower, was that the thing capable of crushing them was already being assembled on the horizon. But that comes later. First there was Hud, alayhi as-salam. Prophet Hud, alayhi as-salam, was not a stranger to Ad. He was one of them. He had grown up in the same households under the same vast Arabian sky, eating at the same tables. As the men who now sat before him in their towering council hall, he knew their names. He knew their children's names. He knew which of the chiefs had a temper and which preferred to use silence as a weapon. He had watched them build. He had watched them grow proud. And he had watched the pride calcify over years and decades into something that could no longer be reached by ordinary words. This was not the speech of a foreigner pointing a finger at a distant people. This was the speech of a brother.
O my people, worship Allah! You have no God other than Him! Will you not fear Him? I convey to you the messages of my Lord, and I am to you a trustworthy advisor.
I am still one of you. I have nothing to gain from this. I am telling you the truth because I love you." The chiefs listened, and then they began to laugh. But in the back of the room, off to the side, quiet, unremarkable to anyone who was not looking for them, a small group stood near Hud without laughing. They did not have power. They did not have a platform. They were not the chief's equal in anything the world measured. They simply believed, and they stayed. Notice what it took to be one of those people. To stand in the most powerful room in the most powerful civilization in the ancient world, and quietly, without drama, remain on the side of one man who had nothing to offer them except the truth. History does not record their names. What the Quran records is simpler and more permanent. They existed, they believed, and they were saved. Hud kept warning year after year. He did not do this out of obligation. There is no prophet who can be forced to love people who reject him. He stayed because he could not stop caring about people who had stopped caring about themselves. And that grief, the grief of someone who loves and is refused, is woven into every word he spoke. The chiefs of Day gave their answer in a council meeting that the Quran preserves forever. They did not argue theology. They did not debate the evidence. The senior chief of Ad stood up, looked around the room at his peers, the strongest men in the strongest nation on earth, and delivered what he thought was a devastating piece of logic.
"Who is stronger than us in might?"
He turned to the crowd as he said it. He performed it. He made it a show, and the room did not just agree, it laughed. Not the nervous laugh of men who have heard something troubling. The comfortable, certain laugh of men who genuinely cannot imagine they are wrong. The Quran preserves this question not as a historical curiosity, but as a lesson that outlived every stone of every tower Ad ever built. These were not evil men in the cartoonish sense. They were powerful men whose entire worldview had been confirmed by every piece of evidence they had ever encountered. They had never been defeated. They had never faced something they could not overcome. So when Hud told them to fear the unseen, the worldview they had built their identity on simply said, "Impossible." That logic is not unique to ancient Arabia. Hud's response was quiet. He did not raise his voice. He let the question sit in the room. And then he said the only thing there was to say,
Do they not see that Allah, who created them, is stronger than them in might?
He turned and walked out. The answer to their question was already being assembled, not in a rival city, not in another army. The answer was being assembled in the sky, and the timeline for its arrival had been set. As the years passed, and Hud kept warning, the rains began to stop. The fertile lands of Day started to dry. The crops that had always grown with abundance began to thin. The water tables dropped. The people felt it in the soil under their feet before they felt it anywhere else. And they came to Hud, not to apologize, not to reconsider. They came with accusations. This is your fault. You are the one who brought bad luck upon us. You are cursed, and now your curse has spread to our land.
It is the same to us whether you preach or not. This is only the habit of the ancients, and we shall not be punished.
Notice what Ad's people reached for first when the drought came. They did not consider whether he might be right. They named the warner as the problem because blaming him meant they did not have to examine the warning. This pattern, calling the truth-teller cursed rather than sitting with the truth, is not something that died with Ad. What Ad did not know, what was critical for them to understand, was that the drought was not the punishment. It was the warning before the punishment. It was Allah's mercy, arriving in the form of discomfort, offering one final door before the door closed. Every dry field was an invitation. Every cracked earth was a chance to turn back. They chose blame instead. And something was already coming from the direction of the horizon. Now we need to travel north. Far to the north of Ayad's towers, up through the wadi systems of the Arabian Peninsula. and into the carved mountains of the northwest there lived a second civilization. Their name was Thamud. When we talk about Thamud, we are not speaking of a mythological people lost to the fog of ancient history. The ruins of Thamud are still there. Madain Saleh, in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, just south of Tabuk, is one of the best preserved archaeological sites in the world. You can book a flight today and stand in front of the homes that Thamud carved into the sandstone mountain faces. The carved facades are still there. The doorways are still there. The stone is still there. But the people are gone. That is not a history lesson. That is a sign still standing in the earth, waiting to be read. Thamud had heard of Ad. They came after them. They lived on the same peninsula. And still they did not learn. Instead, they looked at Ad's fate and did what proud people have always done with cautionary tales. Decided they were different. Ad fell because of their mistake. We are smarter. We carve our homes from mountains, who destroys what is made of mountain. Into this world, Allah sent a man they all knew. His name was Salih, alayhi as-salam. And before he became a prophet, he had been something extraordinary among Thamud. A young man of such obvious character that his own people had looked at him and thought, quietly, among themselves, this one could lead us someday. Then he told them the truth, and the people who had once admired him began to call him a liar. There is something uniquely painful about rejection from people who once believed in you. It is a different kind of aloneness than facing strangers. Salih did not just stand against an indifferent crowd. He stood against people who had seen something real in him and who now redefined that belief as a betrayal. He called them to Allah. He reminded them of Ad, of what happens when a civilization refuses its prophet, of how the mightiest towers in Arabia had become mounds of sand. He asked the question that prophets have always asked.
Will you not fear him?
Some of them moved. Some faces changed for a moment in the direction of truth. But the powerful ones had already decided. Fine, they said. If you are telling the truth, show us something impossible. They said it almost as a joke, a way of ending the conversation. They had not thought through what they were asking. They did not expect an answer. Allah was listening. From solid rock in front of the eyes of everyone gathered, a she-camel emerged. Fully formed, living, enormous. Standing before them in the light of day as a sign that was so undeniably miraculous, that for one moment, even the hardest hearts in Thamud went completely silent. Because there are moments so extraordinary that even a closed heart cannot deny them, at least, not yet.
This is the she-camel of Allah, a sign for you. Let her graze in Allah's earth, and do not touch her with harm, or a painful punishment will seize you.
She needed no handler, no fence, no chain. She walked where she chose, grazed where she chose. On her day, she came to the well and drank her fill. The next day, the people of Thamud took their water. The arrangement was clear. The miracle was unmistakable. And some among Thamud believed in that moment. Faced with something so self-evidently from Allah that the only honest response was submission, she grazed freely among them for months. Every morning she walked through their fields. Thamud was being given another chance. She was a mercy that renewed itself daily. Every day she was not harmed was a day Allah extended His patience toward a people who had done nothing to earn it. The patient ones among Thamud watched her and felt something like gratitude. The proud ones watched her and felt something else. They did not lack evidence. They lacked the willingness to let evidence change them. And something was building beneath the surface of Thamud that the she-camel's continued presence could delay, but could not stop. Back to Ad. Weeks passed. The drought deepened. And then, one day, the people of Ad looked at the horizon and felt something shift deep in their chests. a cloud, moving toward them from the direction of the sea. A cloud that meant rain. Rain, finally. The lush and fertile lands of their ancestors returning. They had been patient enough, and now the skies were delivering. They ran outside, they called to each other. Families poured out of their towers into the open air, faces lifted upward. Some were laughing, some were crying with relief. After the long months of drought, the blessing was coming. Then the sound began. Not the rumble of a rainstorm, something else. A roar gathering and deepening with a kind of intention that rain does not have. The cloud was moving too fast, and it was growing. And it was dark in the wrong way, not the gray of water about to fall. But something denser, something that had weight to it in a way clouds do not. And then it hit. The Quran preserves what the people of Ad said in that moment, watching the cloud approach their valleys.
This is a cloud bringing us rain.
They were still happy when it struck them, and then Allah recorded the truth of what they were looking at. Rather, it is what you were asking to be hastened, a wind wherein is a painful punishment. They had mocked Hud. They had told him, "If you are truthful, bring us what you are promising." They asked for the punishment, and here it was, arriving in the shape of a blessing, moving toward them over the hills, and they ran out to meet it. 7 nights, 8 days. The Quran's numbers are not figurative. The wind did not stop. It did not rest at night. It did not slow for morning. 7 nights and 8 days in succession, unrelenting, unstoppable. And the Quran says you could see the people of Ad being flung through the air like hollow stumps of palm trees. The towers they had built on every high place to announce that nothing could touch them, gone. The council halls where the chiefs had laughed at Hud, gone. The fertile fields they had been so certain of, buried. What remained of the mightiest civilization in the ancient world? The Quran answers that question with one sentence, as though they had never existed, an entire civilization reduced to that. But not everyone died. In the path of the wind, through the roaring and the chaos, a small group moved forward, protected by the will of Allah from everything that was destroying the world around them. Prophet Hud, alayhi as salam, walked out of the destruction with those who had believed with him. They walked forward. They did not look back. This is the part of the story we rarely stop to consider. What does it look like to survive the destruction of your civilization? Not to win a war, to survive a punishment. To walk away from the towers you grew up beside, the streets you knew, the faces of people you had spent your entire life trying to save. Hud did not celebrate. The believing remnant of Ad did not raise their hands in victory. They walked forward into a world that no longer contained anything they had known. Faces covered against the lingering dust, carrying only what they could hold. The silence behind them where the towers used to be. The grief of people who had been right about something they desperately wished they had been wrong about. The Quran records that they existed, that they believed, that they were saved. That is everything. Now we return to the carved mountains of Al-Hayr, back to the people of Thamud, back to the she-camel grazing freely through their villages. Completing a rotation, the miracle itself maintained her day at the water. Their day at the water, day after day after day. For some of Thamud, the miracle was still present and whole. But for the proud men, the men who carried themselves through the village as though the world had been designed for them, the routine had become something else. Each morning the camel appeared felt, to them less like a mercy and more like an insult. Who is this camel to dictate our water? They did not ask this question loudly at first. It began as something muttered between 2 men after a council meeting, a small voice of contempt that found a matching voice and grew quieter and more specific. Exactly the way dangerous things grow. 9 men. The Quran names them 9 family heads who spread corruption in the land and did not reform. They found each other. They met in the dark in voices low enough that the walls could not carry the words. The plan was simple. Kill the camel. Nothing complicated. Just do what their pride had been demanding for months. The fact that they met in whispers is worth noticing. Even they knew that what they were planning could not survive full daylight. Even they understood in some part of themselves that this was not an argument they would win by making it publicly. So they made it in the dark. The camel's arrangements had been specific and practical. Her day, their day, the waters shared in a careful rotation. To people watching from outside, this would seem like a small thing to resent. But the resentment of Thamud was never really about the water. It was about the authority. They did not object to the camel's existence. They objected to being told what to do, even by a living miracle from Allah. Even by a sign produced from solid rock before their own eyes. The real sin of Thamud was not the killing of a camel. It was the refusal to accept any authority outside themselves. The moment came. The 9 men carried out the plan. The she-camel, the sign that had grazed freely through their villages for months, that had renewed the miracle of her existence every single morning, that had been a living extension of Allah's mercy toward a people who had done nothing to earn it, was hamstrung and killed. The news spread through Thamud at once. Some felt horror, some felt shame, and some, the proud ones, the ones who had nodded along in the dark meeting rooms, felt a hollow, unfamiliar sensation that they mistook for triumph. They did it, and the ground had not opened, and the sky had not responded. Maybe Salih was wrong after all. Then another, and then Salih came. He did not come in anger. If you were expecting the fire of a prophet delivering a judgment, what you would have found instead was something much harder to bear. A man who loved these people walking toward them with a face full of grief.
Enjoy yourselves in your homes for 3 more days.
He stood before them and said these words. And then he said the sentence that would echo across 14 centuries of Quranic recitation.
That is a promise that will not be denied.
And then he walked away from his people for the last time. Think about what those words cost him to speak. Salih had not chosen this moment. He had not been waiting for it. He had spent his entire life trying to keep this moment from happening. Warning year after year, presenting the miracle of the camel as a sign that could still turn hearts. Watching some of his people believe and hoping the belief would spread. And now he had to stand before a civilization he had given his life to and say, "This is the last time I will speak to you. In 3 days you will be gone." That is not a victory. That is the most devastating thing a person who loves people can ever have to say. 3 days. The Quran does not tell us how Thamud used those days. Did some of them repent in private? Did the 9 men feel fear in the nights that followed? Did anyone try to leave? What does a civilization do when the countdown has already started? What we know is what happened on the 4th morning. A single great blast, a sound so absolute, so final, that when it ended, there was nothing left to hear anything at all. The people of Thamud were found where they sat and stood and slept. The mountain homes they had carved believing that nothing destroys what is made of stone were still standing. The people inside them were not, and now the 3rd. The Jordan Valley, in the ancient world, was not empty land. It was prosperous and connected, a city that had built itself on commerce, on travel, on the movement of people through its gates. The city was called Sodom, and it had a problem unlike anything in either Ad or Thamud. Ad's sin was pride. Thamud's sin was contempt for divine authority. But Sodom's sin was something that was not just committed, it was celebrated. Publicly, actively defended when challenged, and imposed on anyone who came through the city's gates. Prophet Lut alayhi as-salam had been sent here, not because he was from this people, he was not, He was the nephew of Prophet Ibrahim, alayhi as-salam, sent to a city whose values were alien to everything he believed. And he had been there for years. Lut's loneliness in Sodom was a kind of loneliness we do not talk about enough when we tell his story. He was surrounded by an entire civilization every day, everywhere he looked, and he was alone in it. Not a single man in his household believed with him. His wife was there, but she was not with him, not in the way that word has weight. He called, he warned, he asked and pleaded, and repeated his appeal until the people of Sodom had memorized his arguments simply from hearing them so many times. And still they refused. He prayed what prophets pray when patience has been stretched to its edge.
My Lord, help me against this corrupting people!
And then, one afternoon, 3 young men appeared at his door. Lut looked at them and felt 2 things at the same time. The warmth of a host seeing guests who needed shelter, and the cold dread of a man who knew exactly what this city did to guests. He invited them in. His hands were not steady, but he opened the door. That was Lut, a man who did the right thing even when he was afraid. The kind of faith that is not dramatic or triumphant, but simply keeps going, keeps the door open, keeps trying. He did not know yet, standing in his doorway, who these 3 young men actually were. He would find out soon, but first Sodom would find them. The news moved through Sodom faster than Lut could stop it. 3 young men, strangers, beautiful in a way that made people stop and look twice, had arrived at the house of the prophet. By the time the sun began to lower in the sky, the city knew, and the city came. The men of Sodom arrived at Lut's door as dusk fell. A crowd, a mob, filling the narrow street outside his house with noise and demand. They wanted the guests. They weren't asking. They were pushing against the door with the certainty of people who had never once been refused in their own city. Lut stepped outside. Just imagine being at that door. He had no army. He had no allies in Sodom, not a single man in the street on his side. His wife was inside, but she was not with him. He was one man, standing in a doorway between a house with guests inside and a city without mercy outside. The only weapon he had was his words, and his body refusing to move.
Oh, my people, these are my guests, so do not shame me. Fear Allah and do not disgrace me concerning my guests.
They mocked him. They told him he had no power in this city. They reminded him that he could not stop them, and they pushed forward. Lut could have stepped aside. He could have told the guests that he had done what he could, that the city was too strong, that they would have to look after themselves. The easiest thing in the world in that moment would have been to simply get out of the way. Instead, he stood in the doorway. He held his ground with nothing but his presence and his refusal. And in that single image, a prophet standing alone in a door against a city, you have the whole of Lut's story. Not the miracles, not the escape. Just this, a man who did the right thing because it was the right thing. Even when he had no power to enforce it, even when the outcome looked completely hopeless. The mob pressed closer, and then a voice came from inside the house.
O Lut, we are the messengers of your Lord. They shall not reach you.
In one sentence, everything changed. The man who had been the most helpless he had ever been became, in a single breath, the most certain. Not because his circumstances had changed, the mob was still outside, but because the 3 young men inside his house had just revealed that they were not young men at all. They were angels, messengers of Allah, sent with a decree that had already been written and sealed. They shall not reach you. 6 words, and the prophet, who had been standing alone in a doorway with nothing, had the full weight of divine protection behind him. But in the same breath, in the very same moment, came the grief.
Set out with your family during a portion of the night. Let not any among you look back, except your wife. Indeed, she is of those who will remain behind.
The rescue and the loss arrived together. The instruction that saved him contained within it the confirmation that the woman he had lived beside for years had already made a choice that could not be undone. She had chosen Sodom, not with a dramatic act of defiance, but in the accumulated weight of years in which her heart had never fully moved from the city she lived in. Lut had one night. He had to prepare in the dark without alerting the city. He gathered his daughters. And in the hours before dawn, with the city of Sodom still full of sound around him, he led his family out through the gate and into the open darkness, moving forward under instruction not to look back, trusting a divine command that had only just arrived. Dawn came over the Jordan Valley. The sky lightened. The birds began. Everything looked from a distance exactly as it had the morning before. And then the earth beneath Sodom tilted. The Quran says Allah made the highest part of the city its lowest. The entire plain overturned as if the destruction itself needed to announce the completeness of the judgment. And then came the rain. Not water. Stones of hard clay, layered and marked. The Quran specifies that each stone carried a mark, as though they had been individually sealed and addressed. This was not a random natural disaster. This was the most precise act of divine justice described in these three stories. Nothing caught in that rain was not supposed to be caught, and nothing that was supposed to be saved was harmed. Lut's daughters were with him moving forward. His wife was not. Scholars of Tafsir note that she looked back against the specific command of the angels, and she was destroyed with the city she had never truly left behind. Lut kept walking. He did not look back. He reached safety as the Jordan Valley behind him went silent. He did not raise his hands in celebration. He did not cry out with relief. He simply walked forward into a world that no longer contained his city, his neighbors, or the woman he had lived beside for as long as he had been in Sodom. He was alive. He was alone. And he was saved. Let's step back from the story for a moment. 3 civilizations, 3 prophets, 3 destructions. The ruins of Thamud are still standing in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. Madain Saleh, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can visit them today. There are tour groups, there are photographs, there are travel blogs. But here is what those travel blogs do not always mention. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed through the region of Al-Hijr on the way to the Battle of Tabuk, he covered his face, quickened his camel's pace, and told his companions not to enter those carved homes, not to drink from that water, and not to use any of its resources. He passed through as quickly as he could, not admiring the architecture, not pausing to appreciate the craftsmanship. He moved through Al-Hijr like a man who understood completely what those carved walls were. These are not ruins, they are a warning still standing in the earth. The Dead Sea occupies the valley where Sodom once stood. The lowest point on earth, a body of water so dense with salt that nothing lives in it. Pale and still and silent. Scholars of Tafsir identify it as the site the Quran calls a sign for those who fear a painful punishment. Every person who floats on its surface today is standing in what was once the plain of Sodom. The geography has not moved, only the civilization is gone, and the lands of Ad lie buried under the sands of the empty quarter. One of the largest and most forbidding deserts on earth, nothing grows there. Nothing is found there. The towers are gone. The people who said, "Who is stronger than us in might?" are gone. These nations are not myths. They are geography. They are chronology. They are warning written into the earth, because the lessons have not yet become unnecessary. Here is what all 3 stories have in common. Allah sent each of these nations a prophet from among themselves. Someone who spoke their language, knew their culture, understood their fears, and had no personal benefit from telling them the truth. He gave them time. He gave them signs. In Thamud's case, he produced a living miracle from solid rock and placed it in their village to walk among them every day for months. And in every case, every single case, the response was the same. We will not change. The problem was never a lack of proof. The chiefs of Ad had proof. The people of Thamud watched a miracle emerge from stone. The people of Sodom had a prophet living among them for years. In all three cases, the issue was not that they did not know. It was that knowing was not enough to overcome the decision they had already made to stay who they were. Are there messages in our own lives that we have decided, before hearing them fully, that we are not willing to change for? Are there warnings we call bad luck rather than signs? The destroyed nations are not a warning from the past. They are a mirror for the present. The things they built, they defended more out of pride than out of principle. So do we, more often than we realize. The Quran did not preserve these stories to satisfy curiosity about ancient civilizations. It preserved them because the pattern they describe, warning, refusal, patience, and then consequence, is the same pattern Allah's Sunnah has always followed, and that Sunnah does not change. We have made the Quran easy to remember. Is there anyone who will take heed? That question was asked the first time Surah Al-Qamar was revealed 14 centuries ago. It is still waiting for an answer. 3 nations refused their prophet. 3 times, the warning was delivered with patience, with signs, with time, with mercy. 3 times, the answer was no. But what about the nation that did not refuse? What about the people who loved their prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, more than they had ever loved anything in their lives? Who would have stood at any door, faced any mob, walked through any wind for him? What happened to them on the day he left? In the next episode, we go to one of the most emotionally devastating days in all of Islamic history. The day the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed from this world. The day Umar ibn al-Khattab stood in the masjid with his sword drawn and refused to believe it. The day Abu Bakr walked in, uncovered the Prophet's face, and said the words that changed everything. The day a nation learned what it means to love a prophet and then continue without him. Stay tuned.